If a single man in American criminal history stands out as the prototype of the modern mob boss, it's Scarface Al Capone. Later mobsters ruled longer or held sway over larger territories or made more money. But Al Capone set the standards. In Chicago during the 1920s, Capone was king. Capone was born and bred in America, a product of Brooklyn. Young Al learned the ropes fast. The waves of immigrants flooding into America at the turn of the century brought with them old world traditions, including criminal secret societies. Crime gangs were nothing new in the world, but in large cities, ethnic groups often found police unsympathetic and turned to their own for self-protection. Italian, Irish, and Jewish gangs proliferated, trading insults and threats, making truces and wars like a miniature map of Europe. In this environment, amidst petty theft, con games, gang fights, burglary, extortion, and murder, Alphonse Capone grew up. Born in 1899 in the rugged Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. His parents were poor but honest. Al distanced himself from them by the time he was in his teens. His 5'10", 200-plus pound hulk intimidated people, and he found easy work as a bouncer in a Brooklyn saloon and brothel called the Harvard Inn. One night, Capone referred to a woman at the bar as a whore, and her brother, gangster Frank Galluccio, heard the crack and slashed Capone across the face, leaving 3 indelible scars on the left side of his face. He tried masking them with talcum powder and makeup, but they were there for the world to see, and gave him the nickname no one used in his presence, Scarface. Capone became a member of the 5 Points Gang, slamming labor union leaders for kickbacks and cooperation. His boss, Johnny Torrio, took the young man under his wing. Opposites attract. Capone was gregarious, expressive, and homicidal when necessary. The elder Torrio stayed away from the limelight. In 1919, Johnny Torrio's uncle hired him to come to Chicago. Torrio's uncle was Big Jim Colosimo and ran whorehouses and bars in Chicago. Torrio needed muscle he could trust and sent for young Al Capone as his main man. At the impressive salary of $75 a week, the equivalent of $2,000 today, Capone performed as a bouncer in Big Jim's brothels, bagman to pay off Chicago politicians and cops, and finally, as personal bodyguard. Big Jim's lifestyle appealed to the kid from Brooklyn, and the chubby white slaver taught Capone to appreciate opera, good liquor, and nice clothes. At midnight on January 16, 1920, the Volstead Act closed down every tavern, bar, and nightclub in the United States. This well-intentioned but painfully idiotic law was designed to make a nation of non-drinkers. Instead, it made scofflaws of everyone in America who had a drink. The next day, Al Capone turned 21 years old. He and Johnny Torrio saw the potential to supply a once legal product to the masses. Millions of customers willing to pay through the nose. Their boss said no. Big Jim was happy with the hooker racket and wasn't interested in breaking federal laws and rocking the boat. 4 months into Prohibition, Big Jim responded to a nighttime call from Torrio to sign for a shipment of alcohol at one of his clubs. 2 shots instantly killed Big Jim. Police arrested the 2 obvious suspects the next day. Neither said a thing. No witnesses said a word. Torrio and Capone were in charge, taking the reins of Big Jim's South Side empire as his body was carted off to the cemetery. It was no secret that Capone was in the business of illegal booze, and he rationalized it to the press. Everybody calls me a racketeer. When I sell booze, it's illegal. When they serve it on Lakeshore Drive, it's hospitality. The nationwide taboo against alcohol established an underground nest of bars and nightclubs where you could speak easy. They ranged from crummy waterfront dives to posh dance halls. They all needed beer, wine, and spirits. Capone's outfit filled the orders and set the prices. If a competing bootlegger tried cutting the price or muscling in on a joint supplied by Capone, a couple of goons would break some glasses or windows, or maybe some legs. Madison Street divided the Windy City into the South Side, ruled by the Torrio Capone mob, and the North Side, presided over by Irish gangster Dion O'Banion, a staunch Catholic and vitriolic anti-Italian. O'Banion played to the crowd, regularly helping out destitute citizens with food, money, and furniture. He ran a flower shop as a front. He thought Capone and company were amoral, garlic-eating atheists for profiting off prostitutes. But Deanie O'Banion was also no pushover, employing hundreds of gunzels and thugs, mostly Irish, Jewish, even some Italians. He also carried 3 pistols at all times. O'Banion knew that the Capone-Torrio gang wanted to move into the North Side. He offered Johnny Torrio his North Side brewery for $500,000 cash. Torrio paid and took charge. Days later, police raided the place, shut it down, and arrested Torrio. Capone saw through the coincidence. On the 8th of November, 1924, 3 of Capone's gunmen walked into O'Banion's flower shop and fired. He fell into a bucket of water, dead. O'Banion's lethal ally, Jaime Weiss, vowed revenge and repeatedly tried shooting Capone, never getting lucky. He managed to severely wound Johnny Torrio, who decided the action was too much for him. He left for Italy, handing his share to Capone. At 25, Capone was making $5 million a year, directing business from his lavish headquarters at the Lexington Hotel. He purchased a stylish vacation estate in Florida as well. He had a box permanently reserved at the Opera, large enough for himself and a phalanx of bodyguards. It wasn't enough. Al Capone wanted control of the North Side. While he plotted, Jaime Weiss struck. On September 20th, 1926, while Al was having coffee, Weiss showed up with Bugs Moran and 8 carloads of shooters with machine guns. Hot lead flew everywhere, and Jaime Weiss made his point. Capone was unhurt and called for a truce. To his confidants, he swore, "Those bastards are dead. You hear me? Dead, dead, dead." Capone selected his top 4 killers: Frank Diamond, Frank Nitti, John Scalisi, and Albert Anselmi. The 4 men rented a small apartment across the street from Jaime Weiss headquarters and waited. A few days later, Weiss arrived in a touring car with 3 bodyguards. The chatter of machine gun fire cracked through the night, and Weiss fell to the pavement. With Weiss gone, Capone had near total control of all vice rackets in Chicago. Payoffs went out constantly to local cops, politicians, and judges. Reform Mayor Joseph Clemma stood in Capone's way. Al had knocked him down the City Hall steps once. Corrupt ex-mayor Big Bill Thompson was running again. With Capone's financial help and his goons patriotically patrolling the polling places to make sure citizens voted Republican, Chicago elected Thompson, and Capone controlled the city. The assorted rackets of bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling generated a cool $105 million a year. By 1929, Capone's hand reached beyond his adopted hometown. He controlled at least 10,000 speakeasies in Illinois and had a piece of bootlegging and liquor smuggling rackets from the Canadian border to the Florida coast. He knew people were still out to get him. Al rode around in an armor-plated McFarland limousine built at a cost of $12,000, always preceded by a decoy armored limo a block ahead and followed by another sedan a block behind. He had reason to worry. Bugs Moran, the ranking survivor of the O'Banion gang, still wanted Capone's blood. Scarface decided to send him a Valentine's Day surprise, long distance. On February 14, 1929, 5 uniformed cops raided Moran's bootlegging hideout. Figuring it a conventional rouse, the 7 gangsters calmly lined up against a wall waiting to be frisked and hauled off. They knew Bugs would bail them out in a couple of hours. Outside, Bugs Moran had seen the cops enter the brewery and hid out. It wasn't the first time his luck would save his life. Inside, Moran's men faced the wall. At the last moment, one of the mobsters remembered cops didn't carry machine guns. It was too late. Bullets sprayed the wall. A moment later, 7 men lay on the floor in pools of their own blood. A tethered watchdog moaned and howled. Capone sat safely in Florida, now Chicago's uncrowned king of vice. Other murders followed, including the assassination of newspaperman Jake Lingle. Journalists and women were usually forbidden targets. At first, police suspected Capone had Lingle killed for writing crime exposés. Later, they discovered Lingle was on Capone's payroll and spent $50,000 that was supposed to go for bribes and payoffs. 3 months later, Al himself bashed a couple of traitorous gunzels to death with a baseball bat in homicidal fury. The Great Depression hit the country that year. Al Capone upgraded his public image with good works, opening a soup kitchen for Chicago's homeless. In 1929, the Department of the Treasury targeted Capone for tax irregularities. Treasury agent Elliot Ness, a 26-year-old college graduate, headed a second front, designed as a public diversion from the real assault. With a reputation for honesty, Ness publicly waged war on Capone's empire with his 9-man team, dubbed the Untouchables, because they couldn't be bribed. The story has been told again and again over the years, emphasizing the dramatic shootouts, crashing through the steel doors of Capone's breweries, and waging war against Capone, bottle by bottle, beer keg by beer keg.
Filling the beer. Thousands of gallons with plenty of kick. There's no doubt about it, the raid is a smashing success. Talk about showers, how'd you like to stand under this one? Before the raiders burst the doors and kegs, the brewery was turning out $5,000 worth of beer a day. At 25 cents a glass, this was 20,000 glasses per day. But now that day is gone forever. The foaming torrent is headed for the Chicago River, where the fish will inhale it free of charge. They say this kind of work makes even the agents thirsty. So sometimes they take time out to have a glass of water. But they manage to grin and bear it.
In 1931, a jury found Al Capone guilty of tax evasion. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison.
Talk about excitement at the county jail. It's finally come to pass, and here's the proof. Mr. Alphonse Capone, alias Mr. Al Brown, alias the Big Shot, has met the enemy, and he is there, on his way to the Dearborn Street station with an escort that'll do credit to a sultan. It won't be long now before the world's most notorious gangster will be only an offensive memory. And if he behaves himself while he's a guest of Uncle Sam in Atlanta, he'll be out again in only 7.5 years. And so, up until 1940, Mr. Capone will be Mr. 40,886. Now for a change, they're taking him for a ride. Let that be a good lesson to you. Always be sure and pay your income tax.
The murders of 227 rivals, challengers, and associates by or on orders from Capone were impossible to prosecute. Capone was transferred to the harsh federal prison on Alcatraz Island, where doctors discovered third-stage syphilis caught years before in the brothels of Johnny Torrio. Al's mind quietly rotted away, and he was paroled in 1939. On his Florida estate, he dined with his long-suffering wife and son, played cards with ex-cronies. He happily greeted visitors by repeating, "Hiya, pal, how you doing?" in the middle of conversations. When his heart finally stopped in 1947, he was a forgotten relic from a wild past. Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciano, and Bugsy Siegel defined 3 distinct aspects of the mob boss. The trio met in 1918 when 5'4", 15-year-old Meyer Lansky broke up a fight between a 21-year-old pimp named Salvatore Luciana and a wisecracking 12-year-old named Benny Siegel. Their careers and lives intertwined, but their personalities made them unique, and each came to a distinct end. After their dust-up with young Lucky Luciano, Benny Siegel's attitude and temper prompted something in little Meyer Lansky, who decided his honest life was for chumps. Lansky began to use his brain for crime. He organized floating crap games, sent Benny Siegel and his teenage goons out to work protection against local shopkeepers, and bought off local cops. Meyer remained in the background, always planning and scheming. He and Siegel developed a stolen car ring, provided wheels to crooks for robberies, reselling the hot cars to unsuspecting customers at bargain rates. Burglaries were the next step. Furs, cash, jewels, with Meyer always taking his percentage. Joe the Boss Masseria took the kids under his wing. Expanding his little empire, Lansky teamed up with a labor racketeer named Louis Buckhalter, Lepke to his friends. Lepke's boys farmed out to other gangs as killers for hire, making gangland murders nearly impossible to trace. Lansky schemed with Luciano to consolidate the warring gangs under an umbrella of mutual respect and protection. They knew older mob bosses would resist banding together, so they bided their time. By the mid-30s, Lansky organized a cartel along the lines of a corporation, which consolidated power and tried to keep inter-gang warfare from ruining the business for everyone. The commission included Lucky Luciano, Joe Adonis, Albert Anastasia, Lepke Buckhalter, and Dutch Schultz. Turfs were delineated like political maps. No one encroached on another boss's area. No hits were sanctioned except by approval of the commission. Lower-ranking mobsters brought disputes to the commission, and decisions were final. Meyer held court when volcanic bootlegger and murderer Dutch Schultz wanted to eliminate his nemesis at the district attorney's office. The Dutchman demanded his fellow commissioners sanction a hit on Thomas Dewey. Nobody wanted to bring heat on themselves by hitting a DA. Schultz told them off and vowed to kill Dewey himself. When he left, the commission sealed the Dutchman's fate. 3 hitmen rubbed out Dutch Schultz at his favorite chop house in Newark, New Jersey. His rackets became the property of the syndicate. Less obviously brutal than his rivals, Lansky was just as cold-blooded. When anyone tried to double-cross him, the miscreant was taken for a one-way ride. Lansky's jurisdiction extended into the state of Louisiana with the cooperation of Governor Huey Kingfish Long. Lansky's tentacles reached into Florida, the Bahamas, and Cuba, where the dictator Batista gave the mob carte blanche for gambling, drugs, and prostitution, as long as Batista got his. Throughout the 1940s, Lansky quietly amassed power and money, yet always with diplomacy. During World War II, Meyer angled to get Lucky Luciano released from prison. The Allies would invade Italy soon, and they needed to have a toehold in Sicily. For a certain consideration, Lansky could arrange local guides for the Allied troops. Meyer discussed the plan with Luciano, who reached out to Calogero Vizzini in Palermo. Vizzini's men became an underground army for the Allied troops, guiding them through the hills and providing intelligence on the German and Italian armies. Luciano and Lansky forged an unholy alliance between organized crime and the U.S. intelligence community that would last for decades. Things heated up for all the crime families during the early 1950s. The Senate Committee on Organized Crime, led by Estes Kefauver, subpoenaed mobsters high and low. The red-headed Maine squeeze of the late Bugsy Siegel added some glamour and humor when they subpoenaed her.
I worked for a while. Then the men I was around that gave me things were not gangsters or racketeers or whatever you call these other people. The only time I ever got anything from them was going out and having fun and maybe a few presents. But I happened to go with other fellas. And years I've been going to Mexico. I went with fellas down there, and like a lot of girls, that they've given me things and bought me everything I want. Then when I was with Ben, he paid for everything.
By Ben, you mean Ben Siegel?
Yes.
Did you ever get any money from any other person whom we might call a gangster other than Siegel?
No.
Did you ever get any money from Costello?
No.
And did you ever get any money from Meyer Lansky?
I never got money from any of those fellas.
None of those
None
fellas?
of those fellas. None of these that I've been reading about, or none that I knew. They never gave me anything.
None of the Shetties?
No.
You
I
think-
don't even speak to the... I mean, I met that Charlie once or twice. I don't even talk to him.
You don't like him?
No.
Frank Costello, the prime minister of the syndicate, kept his mouth shut, even when cross-examined on national TV.
You were a bootlegger in 1922, later bringing liquor in and arranging to have it brought in from England and Canada. Is that correct?
No, it's incorrect.
On your testimony before us, didn't you bring liquor in or cause it to be brought in from Canada and allude to it as your liquor at one of your gatherings? And didn't you sell it to people in this country?
I bought liquor and sold it, but I didn't directly myself.
And when you did
transport
that, you broke the laws and flaunted the Constitution, did you not?
it. Well, you can call it that, yes.
Costello later survived a hit by Vincent the Chin Gigante, later a New York boss himself. Costello tactfully retired. Challenged by a younger generation of mobsters in the 1950s, Lansky dealt with them in the old-fashioned way: murder and intimidation. His cartel reached from Hong Kong to Colombia. He bragged, "We're bigger than U.S. Steel." The worth of his worldwide empire was estimated at $300 million. In 1970, the government indicted Meyer Lansky for tax evasion. He fled to Israel. By the law of return, Israel accepted Jews from any nation, but Meyer's criminal past raised ethical and diplomatic problems. Lansky finally returned to the U.S. to face charges in 1972. A grand jury indicted him on contempt and income tax evasion, but it was a small penalty for a life of subversion and lawlessness. Handsome, charming, and mercurial, Benny Siegel became Hollywood's high-profile mobster. The boys back east preferred discretion, but Ben Siegel liked the limelight. His homicidal rages made his friends and enemies think he was crazy. He had bugs in his head, they said, leading to Siegel's nickname, Bugsy. Taking it on the lam after one too many murders, Siegel headed west to develop operations on behalf of the syndicate. Los Angeles was a boom town with plenty of pickings for a smart operator with angles and imagination. Local mob boss Jack Drania resented anyone muscling in, but half a profit was better than being dead. Neither the cops nor the East Coast mob had respect for Drania and his men, like squat little Mickey Cohen. They were the original gang who couldn't shoot straight. Newspapers referred to Siegel as a sportsman, and he did spend plenty of time at the track, hanging out with rich marks, fellow wise guys, and movie stars. Siegel renewed his friendship with George Raft, a pal from New York's Hell's Kitchen, who danced and acted his way to stardom. Raft used his insight of wise guys to bring believability to his movie gangster roles. Raft was also a soft touch for Ben Siegel when he needed a couple $1,000. Raft knew better than to ask Ben to repay any loans. In conjunction with Jack Drania, Bugsy implemented an international wire relay to send racetrack results to bookmakers across the country, for a percentage, of course. Siegel also helped set up a narcotic smuggling system through Mexico and backed a floating casino, the Rex, which anchored off the coast just outside the 12-mile limit. Though he had a wife and 2 daughters back east, Bugsy played the field. His main squeeze was Dorothy Taylor, now the Countess de Fossil. Bugsy's enthusiasm often overruled his good sense. In the late 1930s, before war broke out, 2 Sharpies offered Siegel exclusive rights to a new super explosive called Atomite, 30 times stronger than dynamite. To prove it worked, the scam artists blew up half a mountain. Bugsy and his countess decided to sell it to Mussolini, who actually made a down payment. The 2 scientists made a quick exit, leaving Bugsy to stand up to the irate dictator. Meanwhile, at the Countess's estate, visitors included high-ranking Nazis Hermann Goering and Dr. Joseph Goebbels. Siegel hated them both and was tempted to kill them on general principles. Unfortunately, he didn't. In 1940, things started heating up for the mob. A Murder Incorporated hitman, Abe Rellis, alias Kid Twist, was collared and began to talk. In 2 years of testimony, Rellis named Siegel, Lansky, Lucky Luciano, and dozens of bosses, soldiers, and hitmen. Kid Twist obligingly took a header out of his guarded hotel room window. No one ever proved who helped him try to fly. But his testimony was the key in the 1941 trial of Louis Buckhalter. Lepke spent a fortune defending himself on multiple murder charges, but lost. Electrocution of the high-ranking mobster put wise guys across the country on notice. Siegel helped plug some of the leaks caused by the Rellis fallout, personally bumping off his old friend Harry Greenberg in Los Angeles and Whitey Krakauer in Manhattan. Arrested in California for Harry Greenberg's murder, Siegel waltzed in and out of jail as if it had a revolving door and beat the rap. Bugsy found a new flame, Virginia Hill, red-headed girlfriend of mob boss Joe Adonis. Virginia matched Bugsy's flair for foul-mouthed squabbles and knew when to keep her mouth shut. Siegel also discovered the desert. If you squinted, you could see Bugsy's vision, a classy 24-hour mecca of craps, slots, poker, and blackjack, lubricated by booze and decorated by good-looking broads. Siegel got the okay from the commission to spend a couple $1 million on a joint he would call the Flamingo, his nickname for Virginia. Again, Bugsy's ego got in the way of his good sense. During wartime, building materials were scarce, which meant paying through the nose. He did, because he thought his Flamingo was worth it. The construction cost climbed from $2 million to $6 million and counting. Meyer tried to talk sense to him. He laid down the law: start turning a profit fast or pay back the money. Siegel said no, it had to be right. Siegel's vision of gambler's heaven was still flawed when the Flamingo opened in December 1946. The joint lacked finishing touches. The electrical system was screwy. Siegel bet that big stars would love to fly to Las Vegas at Christmas. He lost the bet. To top it off, the weather was lousy. Bugsy hired the Ritz brothers to headline. So what if most people thought they were corny? Ben Siegel thought they were hysterical. Jimmy Durante showed up, and Bugsy's old pal George Raft. But winter rain and wind convinced most of the Hollywood crowd to stay home. It was a bust. Siegel knew that was only a temporary setback. He closed the place and scheduled a reopening in the spring. In February, Lucky Luciano called a summit in Havana. The outfit was out millions in this desert deal, and Bugs was acting like he was a boss. Meyer Lansky saw hints that a couple million vanished by way of Virginia Hill. She denied it, but later took an unexpected trip to Mexico. And it looked like Siegel had sold something like 300% of his casino. Meyer couldn't convince Ben to play by any rules but his own. Nothing Meyer said to the other bosses could calm them down. Ben Siegel was playing Monopoly in the desert with their dough. Luciano gave an order. Lansky saw that it was carried out. Later he said, "I had no choice." Siegel flew back to L.A. to relax. Reading a paper on the couch of Virginia's $1 million home, he didn't realize payment had come due. Outside, a button man waited with a high-powered .30-30 rifle. 3 shots smashed the window and Bugsy's head. One of his baby blue eyes was blown across the room. Minutes later, Mo Sedway and friends walked into the Flamingo and said, "Ben's dead. This is our place now." Unlike the old days, Ben Siegel's funeral was pretty low-key. Few business associates showed their faces lest their bosses get the wrong idea. With no questions asked, Virginia Hill made sure the syndicate got their couple of $1 million back. Siegel's legacy would bloom in the desert, watered by alcohol, fed by fast cash, growing like a neon weed. The Flamingo begat the Sands, the Sahara, the Riviera, and the rest. Las Vegas begat Reno, Lake Tahoe, Atlantic City, Laughlin. Ben Siegel was right. Give them flash, and they'll spend money by the yard. In the 5 decades since his inspiration, billions would be raked in. But it's small comfort to be right when you're lying on a slab. They even misspelled the name on his toe tag. Lucky Luciano was born Salvatore Luciana in Naples. By age 10, Sal was a New Yorker with a shoplifting record. 8 years later, he had graduated to pushing drugs and pimping, keeping his women in line by force and addiction. He enjoyed debasing them. The 5'7" teenager ran with the brutal 5 Points gang, pushing dope and working alongside a hefty young killer named Alphonse Capone. He changed his name from Luciana to the more masculine Luciano, but his friends called him Lucky. Often arrested for gang murders, Luciano always walked away from the charges. He never let the code of silence stand in the way of self-preservation. His expanding prostitution empire in Manhattan included everything from $2 street whores to showgirls available all night for $100, the equivalent of $2,000 today. With more than 5,000 women forced to work on their backs for him, the poor peasant kid from Naples was a millionaire by the age of 30. Lucky's fortunes held out during a one-way ride in 1929. Unknown thugs, probably from Legs Diamonds gang, cut Luciano with a knife, punched his back with an ice pick, and beat him brutally. Luciano became the only mobster to be taken for a ride and live. He dummied up to the cops. "I'm pals with everybody," he said. "Nobody's after me. Everybody likes me." Soon after that, Diamond's men began disappearing or turning up very dead all over New York. Nobody ever tried to lean on Luciano again. At least a dozen men lost their lives thanks personally to Luciano. The real total may have been 5 times that. Chief of Chiefs in New York was Giuseppe Masseria, alias Joe the Boss. Joe relied heavily on Luciano, who in turn relied on a young miscreant named Vito Genovese. At that point, Lucky and Vito were loyal to Joe the Boss, leading the war against the rival Maranzano gangs. New York streets ran red with gangster gore. The rivalry spread to Chicago, Cleveland, everywhere that opposing gangs fought over profits from bootleg booze, hookers, gambling, and dope. The Masseria-Maranzano War threatened everyone's lives and fortunes. Death and poverty didn't fit with Lucky's long-range plan. Lucky and Meyer Lansky wanted a commission to oversee all rackets, a modern business-like viewpoint to crime, not the old family-style mafia rule with each faction led by one of the old Mustache Pete kingpins. An ecumenical hit squad combined killers from various New York gangs: Bugsy Siegel, Albert Anastasia, Vito Genovese, and Joe Adonis. They waited as Lucky had a pleasant dinner with Joe the Boss. When Luciano left to wash his hands, the gang moved in to blast Masseria to heaven. Wherever. Charlie Lucky quickly announced a truce and allowed old Salvatore Maranzano to be boss of bosses for a whole 6 months. It was Maranzano who introduced the old world term Cosa Nostra, a coy Sicilian slang term meaning our thing. In September 1931, 4 men disguised as police entered Maranzano's office and killed him. With the last Mustache Pete dead, Luciano became the acknowledged head of the rackets in New York. This murder also changed the structure of the mafia. The secret society began 500 years before, when Sicilian freedom fighters waged guerrilla war against French occupation soldiers. By the 19th century, patriotism devolved into corruption. Packs of blackmailers, murderers, and thieves, thousands of whom emigrated to America, preying on fellow Sicilians. Sicilian blood had been a must for membership in the mafia. Mob membership now open to non-Sicilian Italians, under Luciano and his chief lieutenant, Vito Genovese, both from Naples. Luciano lorded over a relative calm from his palatial suite at the Waldorf. Even after the repeal of Prohibition, Luciano's vice fortune remained secure. Heroin, cocaine, prostitution, and gambling kept him filthy rich, with enough money to corrupt police and stay out of jail. In 1935, District Attorney Thomas Dewey targeted high-visibility mobsters in New York with the full cooperation of Italian Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. Beer baron Dutch Schultz topped the list, indicted on tax evasion. Luciano, Genovese, and others quickly grabbed up the Dutchman's territory for themselves. Schultz beat the rap and demanded Dewey's murder. Lucky and the commission ordered the elimination of their board member for self-protection. But Lucky was next on Dewey's list. Fear kept most witnesses quiet, but the size of Luciano's empire worked against him. Enough brave witnesses testified that Lucky was indicted on 90 counts of extortion and direction of harlotry. He received 30 to 50 years at Dannemora prison. Authorities turned down Luciano's parole requests twice, but Charlie got lucky again. The luxury liner Normandy blew up in the Hudson River as it was being refitted as a troop ship. Authorities suspected Nazi sabotage. They suspected dock workers might sympathize with the Axis powers, specifically Italy. The mob controlled the docks. Luciano passed along the word to cooperate with the war effort and to take care of any rats they might find. There were no further hints of sabotage in New York Harbor. At the end of the war, Luciano got a pass from Dannemora, but was deported as an undesirable alien. Lansky and Frank Costello saw him off, each with a suitcase. One contained a new wardrobe, the other $500,000 in cash to tide Lucky over. Luciano had homegrown rivals in Italy, but few with a more sinister reputation. He established his own control of the local mobs in post-war Rome. Lansky and the loyal Costello made sure Luciano always got his cut of mob proceeds, but Italy bored Charlie Lucky. He sailed to Havana and called a meeting of mobsters in February 1947. Everybody who was anybody came bearing respect and cash. Lucky ordered Bugsy Siegel to pay back the dough he'd borrowed from the various boys. Siegel was murdered 4 months later. Lucky started feeling the Havana heat. A local reporter discovered who he was, and the story got back to the States. Despite well-placed bribes from Lansky, the U.S. government put the squeeze on Batista to kick Luciano out. The Italian government wasn't happy to see him either. Persona non grata in Rome, he settled in his native Naples, a dapper, middle-aged gentleman living peacefully with his mistress, quietly controlling the multi-million-dollar flow of drugs from Europe to the States. Greedy Vito Genovese stirred up trouble, ordering a hit on Albert Anastasia and Costello, both loyal to Lucky. With Anastasia dead and Costello wounded, Genovese saw no roadblocks to absolute power. To announce his new mob supremacy, Genovese called a meeting in upstate New York, attended by every power player in organized crime, except Luciano and Meyer Lansky. With the help of Carlo Gambino, they arranged for the traitorous Genovese to be busted for a drug rap the next year. He spent the next 15 years in prison. Even in exile, Luciano was not to be crossed. In the wake of anti-Italian shows like The Untouchables, he felt the time had come to tell his story. He met with movie producer Martin Gosch at the Naples airport in January 1962 to discuss a film biography, and dropped dead of a convenient heart attack. Salvatore Luciano, alias Charles Luciano, alias Charlie Lucky, was laid to rest with the pomp of royalty. King of pimps, czar of heroin, and monarch of murder. With the influx of Italian and Sicilian immigrants toward the end of the 1900s, the black hand rackets began to appear. Italian thugs preyed on other immigrants, playing on their isolation and their fear of the police, threatening physical harm unless paid off. More elaborate were secret societies like the Mafia, composed of Sicilian emigres, and its main competition, the Camorra, a Neapolitan brotherhood. As crime became big business in the 1930s, the names of the organizations became vaguer and more generic. The outfit, the organization. One thing that did not change was omerta, the code of silence. A member did not rat, period. In 1951, Senator Estes Kefauver led a congressional inquiry into the interstate crime underworld, a show with plenty of star value, but not much action. Frank Costello, one of the founders of the outfit back in the 30s and Lucky Luciano's most loyal friend in the States, had nothing to say. Joe Adonis took the Fifth Amendment, refusing to speak on the grounds that he might tend to incriminate himself. He was deported in 1953. Thanks to Kefauver, the public knew organized crime was a corrupt influence in cities across the country, even though FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover continued to deny it for reasons of his own. Joe Valachi was a minor cog in the wheel of American crime. A thug for hire, a made man, he spent most of his 5 decades obeying orders for the mob in New York, working in the garment industry. His 30-year career covered the corporatization of crime. A numbers runner in the 1930s, Valachi also had his fingers in the lucrative black market during the war and peddled heroin and cocaine. A string of drug arrests landed him in Atlanta's federal prison. Also incarcerated there was crime boss Vito Genovese, who considered the small-timer a pest and a potential problem. Unlike the insignificant Valachi, Genovese was an amoral survivor. Contemporary of Luciano, Genovese avoided Lucky's prison fate by fleeing the country in 1937 with an estimated $2 million. Placed under arrest and transported back to America, Genovese faced prosecution for an old murder. One of the 2 witnesses politely dropped dead from poison, and Vito walked out of court, seeking total control of the mob. With Luciano in exile, Genovese concentrated on killing everyone who might not support him 100%. The 1950s saw a return to public mob hits that smacked of the roaring 20s. Albert Anastasia, unpredictable head of Murder Incorporated, was the deadliest threat. On orders from Genovese, Anastasia came to a brutal end in a barber chair when gunmen Carlo Gambino and Joe Biondo pumped a dozen bullets into them. Gambino succeeded Anastasia as head of the Vincent Magnano family. Later that year, Genovese called a hoods convention in upstate New York. More than 100 high-ranking mobsters from all over the country had come to Appalachian, New York to witness the self-appointment of Vito Genovese as boss of bosses. A police raid turned the secret meeting into a spectacle. Less than a year later, Genovese was convicted on charges of drug smuggling and distribution, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Genovese still gave orders, both to the outside and the convicts inside. In his paranoia, he suspected Joe Valachi of ratting on the drug charge. Learning Genovese ordered him murdered in prison, Valachi struck first, bludgeoning the hitman with a pipe.
You honestly believe that they were under orders from Genovese to kill you there in prison?
Yes, 100%, Senator.
100%?
Yes.
So when you saw Joe Beck, who you thought was Joe Beck, in front of you,
Right.
You did what?
I hit him on the head with the pipe. And
a piece of iron pipe from the construction job there?
Well, yeah, they were building a new industry at this particular place of the yard, you know, near the end of the ball stand, grandstand.
And you hit him with that pipe?
Yeah.
More than once?
About 3 times.
About 3 times?
Very hard.
He killed the wrong man. Valachi was now up on a murder charge. Even in solitary confinement, Valachi feared for his life. Genovese's tentacles reached into the prison kitchen, and many of Don Vito's enemies died because of something they ate that disagreed with them.
Do you know if Vito had tried to kill any other people in jail? By poison or hanging?
There was people killed, but not in this particular time. They were killed, like, for instance, there was a witness against him in the Murder Incorporated. Do you remember that, Senator?
Yes.
There was a Peter LaTempa poisoned in prison.
Who was that?
Peter LaTempa.
What happened to him?
Well, they found him poisoned.
Poisoned?
In Raymond Street Jail, while he was there waiting to testify against Vito. And then there was another one, Abe Willis. He was also supposed to testify. He fell out the window.
Facing death from a murder sentence or death from a suspicious godfather's decree, Valachi turned. Under heavy guard, federal agents marched the Khan into the Capitol building where he testified before the Committee on Organized Crime. Not since Nicola Gentile testified to save his own neck in the 1930s had a member of the Mafia disclosed the secret workings of the hidden forces of crime in America. Some questioned whether Valachi knew anything. The information he offered wasn't new, just verification of facts and names police had had for years.
Are you a member of any such organization?
Yes, I am.
What is the name?
I was.
What is the name of it? It is
Cosa Nostra in Italian.
Cosa Nostra in Italian.
Our thing and our family in English.
Our thing and our family in English.
Few hoods outside New York referred to the outfit as Cosa Nostra. Insiders scoffed, but Valachi was taken seriously by Vito Genovese, who put a $100,000 bounty on the man's head. No one ever collected. Valachi lived for another 9 years in prison. He did the unthinkable, broke the code of silence, omerta, and he was not the last. The modern gangster usually avoids publicity. High visibility brings scrutiny by police, and when your business is illegal, that can be a problem. New York's John Gotti was the opposite, a swaggering bully with panache, a brutal thug in $1,000 silk suits. He fancied himself a kingpin of the old school, ordering murders with the coldness of a Luciano, strutting through the Big Apple with a dash of Legs Diamond. Unlike most of his older contemporaries, Gotti gloried in his high profile. He traveled in gaudy style in chauffeured limos, surrounded by goons and dogged by TV cameras. He fancied himself another Al Capone or Bugsy Siegel. Gotti was an egoist who craved attention, not just from his underlings, but from the whole. His confident smirk became a familiar sight on the local news in New York. His public stance against drugs and violence seemed to indicate a newer, gentler Cosa Nostra. For a while, the media helped him into the spotlight. Gotti loved the idea that the public loved him, that movie stars went out of their way to meet him, that he was a star. He figured he could run for president and win, but why take a step down from being king of the mob? What Gotti forgot was the short shelf life of a mob boss, and that the public loves to see their heroes take a fall. Gotti had been a minor thug since childhood. His parents were not mob-connected, but he saw the life as a way to money and respect. His bullying attitude attracted a small clump of men who followed him into the life. His apprenticeship became a vocation. Aging mobster Carlo Gambino took Gotti under his wing in the mid-1960s. Carlo Gambino inherited the fiefdom after the murder of Albert Anastasia in 1957. The dying Gambino personally chose Paul Castellano as his successor. Gotti and others would have preferred the foul-mouthed Neil Della Croce. Castellano continued Anastasia's freeze on new members of the family. Like his predecessor, he worried that new members would secretly be dealing heroin, which would undermine authority and bring federal heat. As a hijacker, Gotti filled Castellano's coffers with money earned from fencing stolen goods like furs, meat, furniture, anything and everything. Flattering Castellano to his face, the predatory Gotti privately called the old Don every variety of filthy name because he refused to appoint him a made man. The same year the family finally accepted Gotti officially, another up-and-coming gangster was made, Sammy Gravano, alias the Bull. Paul Castellano made Sammy personally, instilling in him the ethics of the mafia. Made men never deal drugs, violate another man's wife or children, or raise their hands against each other. Gravano took the vows seriously and lived a comparatively normal private life. John Gotti fancied himself a man's man. That meant fathering a couple of daughters out of wedlock, cheating on his wife, and enjoying the nightlife. Often careless, Gotti was convicted for the attempted manslaughter of James McBratney in 1975 and convicted twice for hijacking. Gotti liked action, and Castellano was too cautious, with good reason. A new law broke through the insulation of the levels of organized crime, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, dubbed the RICO Act. If facts showed a conspiracy, an entire criminal enterprise could be brought down. No pushover, Castellano still appreciated the value of intra-family honesty. He remained friends with his rival Vincente the Chin Gigante, head of the rival Gambino family. Gotti decided Castellano was in the way. Slowly, deviously, he pulled others into his plan while professing allegiance to Castellano's face. In 1980, one of Gotti's 5 children was accidentally killed by a neighbor's car. It was an accident. The 12-year-old Frank Gotti was weaving in and out of streets on a borrowed motorbike, but the loss made Gotti feel some of the grief he had caused so many others. The neighbor vanished forever a few months later. People got dead when they crossed Gotti. In December 1985, Gotti put his secret coup into action. Paul Castellano was scheduled to have a sit-down dinner at Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th Street. When the limo bearing the crime boss pulled up, the 4 men opened up, murdering Castellano and his driver. Afterward, Gotti expressed his outrage and vowed to find the killers. In the meantime, he took his place as the head of the Gambino crime family. Without making a direct accusation, Chin Gigante sent a message to Gotti that someone, someday, would pay for Paul's murder. Chin had nearly killed mob founder Frank Costello in 1957. Now, 100 pounds lighter, Chin feigned senility, walking through the streets in pajamas to convince the ubiquitous surveillance agents he was harmlessly crazy. Chin was crazy like a fox. He knew Gotti did the hit. He set a revenge plan into action. Operating primarily out of a dilapidated storefront in Bensonhurst, Gotti ruled his new empire with threats, battery, and murder. Gotti skated through an assault charge after the victim suddenly forgot who had pounded him to a pulp. A closer call was a major RICO trial which could have meant 25 years in prison. Although the evidence was strong, Gotti confidently smirked his way through the trial. A car bomb designed for Gotti blew up during the trial. Gotti flunky Frank DeSico and his driver got blown to bits instead. Gotti never imagined the wily old Chin was the man behind the bomb. His legal invincibility was largely due to attorney Bruce Cutler, who showed angry flamboyance rather than legal aptitude. Cutler yelled. Gotti liked guys like that. Unknown to the prosecution or judge, one of the jurors offered himself for hire. Knowing the fix was in, Gotti never lost his cool. The myth was born of the Teflon Don. Nothing stuck to him. Gotti fancied himself old-style Cosa Nostra, but exempted himself from the rules. Long used to crime bosses, New Yorkers thought Gotti showed class, particularly in his public statements about the evils of heroin, which he would never allow in his organization. The fact was, Gotti made a fortune from coke and heroin through his many subordinates, including his own brother. Slowly, law enforcement regrouped. Gotti's street headquarters was under constant video surveillance. A secret room in the building was surreptitiously bugged for audio. Every law enforcement organization in the city wanted to nail the braggart. The audio tapes stripped away the public veneer of a charming tough guy with a high moral code. This was a drug-pushing scumbag, a murderous motor mouth disrespecting anyone who wasn't in the room with him. Suspicious of even the most loyal of his men, Gotti again broke custom and initiated his son, bypassing dozens of soldiers who had earned the rank rightfully. Audio surveillance always was discontinued when Gotti's lawyers, Bruce Cutler, or Sammy's attorney, Gerald Shargle, were mentioned or arrived on the scene. By law, their conversations were privileged. But enough facts came out that both lawyers represented other members of the crime family, although paid by Gotti. That meant they were no longer just legal representatives, they were part of an ongoing criminal enterprise, which also meant audio surveillance of them was fair game. After months of covert observation and incriminating confessions recorded on tape, the cops were ready to take Gotti to court again. Gotti flack Carlo Vaccarezza organized pro-Gotti demonstrations in front of the courthouse, as lively and spontaneous as marches in Peking or Tehran. With his usual lawyers unable to defend him, Gotti dropped the act of polished indifference. He glared, swore, and spat filth at witnesses, the prosecution, and the judge. Behind the mask of the suave wise guy was just another thug who betrayed his own code and clawed his way to the top. Hearing Gotti's voice on the tapes opened Gravano's ears and eyes. Sammy the Bull finally realized that loyalty was a one-way street with John Gotti. You gave, you never got. And he was supposed to keep his mouth shut and take the fall for his boss? Secretly, Gravano let prosecution know he'd be willing to talk if he got a deal. Just as secretly, the DAs smuggled him out of a high-security jail and started downloading information from the mind of the underboss. Specifically, Gravano filled them in on the Paul Castellano hit. Who was there, who the shooters were, who ordered it done. This meant Gotti was not only eligible for vice raps, but murder. The tapes and the testimony of Sammy the Bull transformed the Teflon Don into the Velcro Don. Now, everything stuck to him. On April 2nd, 1992, he was found guilty on all counts. He received multiple terms of life imprisonment and was sent to the U.S. Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois. The Gotti fraternity barely survived the devastating testimony of Sammy the Bull. The gang still existed, headed by Gotti's inexperienced son, but at least one arm of New York's organized crime had been cut off at the elbow.